Please welcome Founding Director of the Center on Global Energy Policy and IGP Faculty Advisory Board Member, Professor Jason Bordoff.
Welcome, everyone. Thanks for being here today. Applause are not necessary, but appreciated. For those who don't know me, I'm a professor of practice here at CEPA, direct the Center on Global Energy Policy. Also pleased to be here as a member of the Institute of Global Politics Faculty Advisory Board. Unfortunately, our dean, Karen Urimilo, is not able to be here, so I'm pleased to be here to represent IGP in her stead. IGP was really thrilled earlier this year in the fall to announce a strategic partnership with the Africa Center. And we've had the pleasure to have Martin Kamani, who I've known for many years through mutual friends, serve as an IGP Carnegie Distinguished Fellow. And this collaboration was born from that in an effort to build on that great partnership. And just so wonderful to see that build and develop and to have you here today. Through this collaboration, IGP is going to serve as a vehicle through which the Africa Center can bring African perspectives, leadership, and global strategy to CEPA, to IGP, to the broader Columbia community. As someone who runs a center focused on energy and climate change, I'll just say having that sort of access to those perspectives from Africa is deeply valued, exceptionally important, doesn't get enough attention in a lot of the conversations we have about energy and climate change. The hope is that this partnership is going to enrich CEPA's global policy education, offering programming and engagement that's going to delve into some of the pressing regional issues that have both local but also very global implications. Answering the question, how are African states and institutions navigating a changing world, forging new alliances, shaping global governance on their own terms. And in turn, we hope that IGP can serve as a resource for the Africa Center in expanding the reach of its work and facilitating student internships at the center. The workshop today is the first of many programs we hope to host as part of that collaboration. And this workshop aims to generate a politically grounded, ethically rigorous space and set of policy recommendations for African leaders, institutions, and international partners. And it aims to rethink, to interrogate how we are going about deal-making on the continent, to explore the broader question of what African governments and diplomats can do to navigate foreign policy and diplomacy in the Trump administration, and to examine how African countries are navigating the intense competition for local minerals and identify opportunities for cross-African collaboration. Today's workshop comes at a critical moment in the global energy and geopolitical landscape. The world is racing to secure the minerals that underpin the technologies of the future, from clean energy to advanced defense systems. Africa really stands at the center of that contest. I have a new essay that just came out in the latest issue of Foreign Affairs that posted online a few hours ago called The Return of the Energy Weapon. I'm happy to talk a little more about that in the discussion, but this intense competition for resources is one of the things that I and my co-author explore at some length. And I'm really happy to, straight off putting that out in the world, come and have this conversation focused on Africa and the unique challenges that countries in the region are facing, participating in the energy transition, but pursuing industrialization, their own strategies to increase economic growth, all of which is vital to their economic development and to their geopolitical and political stability. I think rather than approach mineral development through a narrow lens of transactional deals or even geopolitical rivalry, what we're trying to do today is focused on Africa's own interests, peace and security in the region, economic development, critically important, and regional integration and self-determined governance. And by rooting that conversation in these priorities, we hope to help shift the global mineral conversation from one that simply asks, how can great powers gain access to resources, to one that asks how Africa can lead and help shape the terms of that discussion and of that access. So that's the goal of today's panel and event, which really brings together an extraordinary group of practitioners, policymakers, researchers, industry leaders, and I want to thank you all for joining us here today. and really thrilled that my friend Ambassador Martin Kimani is here to introduce our panel. He serves as president and CEO of the Africa Center following his role as executive director of NYU's Center on International Cooperation. Before that, from 2021 to 2024, he was the permanent representative of Kenya to the United Nations, where he held the positions of president of the Security Council in October 2021 and president of the UNDP and the UN Office for Project Services and the UN Population Fund Executive Board in 2023. He holds a Master's of Art, a PhD in War Studies from King's College, and lots of other degrees and honorary degrees that, because we started a few minutes, I will spare you reading them all, but an extraordinarily distinguished background, and I always learn an enormous amount in our conversations, and I'm looking forward to learning more from you today. Ambassador Kimani.
Welcome to the stage, President and CEO of the Africa Center and former IGP Carnegie Distinguished Fellow, Ambassador Martin Kimani.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon. Thank you, Jason, for those very generous remarks and for being here. And thank you to IGP for this really important partnership that I think is going to produce a lot of exciting and impactful work in the months and years to come. We don't have much time, and so let me stand on protocol to say that, to thank you all for coming and to note that we're joined here by the permanent representative of Malawi and permanent representative of Equatorial Guinea, among other senior officials representing national delegations to the United Nations, officials of the United Nations, and professors, and students here at SIPR and other partners that we have here in New York City. We are catching one of the world's most important conversations as it gets underway, which is, to put it in a sentence, how can Africa turn the precious minerals that the world needs to navigate the energy transition, to develop new technologies, both in defense and in the consumer space? How can Africa use this moment in a way that benefits the people of Africa, that leaves Africa wealthier, more secure than it is today? This is a conversation that we often hear in the context of the major powers as they contend against each other. We hear this conversation about these minerals in relation to who is the most powerful force in the world and how can they access these minerals to make themselves even more powerful. But today, we have the opportunity to center the African perspective and African interests and ask, where are the Africans and how will the Africans move on this moment, this very delicate moment? It's really an honor to introduce the following panelists who come to this public session after a morning where we had some more technical discussions that will then feed into what we're discussing this morning, and out of it will come a product that I will tell you more about in terms of how we will use it later on. We have a very distinguished panel. Atak Melkonyan is with the UNDP. Atak, perhaps you can join us. He has been with the UN. He has more than 3 decades of experience in the UN, and he's been very prominent in impact finance and sustainable development across more than 40 countries. Via UNDP, he's a contributor to the Timbuktu Mine Tech Hub, which is an accelerator nurturing youth-led innovation in the mining sector. We are also joined by Grace Akinyi, who is the founder and CEO of Ecomining, a social enterprise that provides mineral extraction solutions based on community engagement and care for the environment. She is also a leader of Women in Mining, and is a student at the Colorado School of Mines. Welcome, Grace. We have Jason Bordoff, who was just here. and is a founding director of the Center on Global Energy Policy at Columbia. And just to put it quite simply, Jason has served in the US government in the energy space as a leader in that space. And his shop really brings together people who've been in policy at senior levels with people who have a research background, and together that thinking is supposed to drive forward very practical solutions for governments and the global system to be able to engage on energy in a way that is additive to sustainability, peace, and security. Thank you very much, Jason. We're also joined by two members of the panel online, Omid Ameri, who's the managing director of Woodcross Resources, the company behind Uganda's first integrated tin refinery, which was a major step towards local value addition in Africa's mineral economy, and has over 15 years of experience in investment banking and energy finance. And Woodcross has also achieved the application of blockchain technology for mineral traceability and set standards for the industry. We are also joined by Colin Coleman, a South African banker who's a senior fellow, a non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council's Africa Center, where I used to work, actually. And he's a former CEO of Goldman Sachs Sub-Saharan Africa. We are so glad to have these panelists, and I'll join them now for a conversation that is going to end really in about 40 minutes. So it's going to be very, very brief, and I hope that there'll be an opportunity to come to the floor to get some questions. So perhaps in the interests of time, I have some questions that we had organized earlier that I think cut to the heart of some of what we need to hear this afternoon. Atak, you are at UNDP, and I remember the launch of Timbuktu, a hub of innovation spread across Africa. This seemed to me at the time that it was launched to be a very ambitious effort. And you are in charge of the mining tech hub. Can you tell us a bit more about some of the results you're having and the promising technologies that are emerging from this effort?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Ambassador. Well, first of all, a couple of words about what Timbuktu is. It's the largest initiative that is happening in Africa so far, targeting the African startup ecosystem. So to mobilize about $1 billion in investments towards the African startups across all the countries and across 10 different technology sectors, including also mining tech. So, well, I am a senior technical advisor looking after overall implementation of Timbuktu, and particularly also the mining tech hub. So we talk about a multi-pillar system. So we work, the first pillar is actually something called unipods, university pods. Those are maker spaces that we are setting up in universities all across the Africa in 54 countries to help the students to, and faculty, by the way, to come up with their ideas and become future founders of the ventures or impact ventures. When we have the network of so-called technology hubs, each hub being specialized in a particular technology, and one of those hubs is a mining tech hub, which is based out of Lusaka. Now again, those hubs are based in specific countries, but they are Pan-African. So mining tech hub in Lusaka is actually a Pan-African hub, and the nature of the hub, we can look at that if we sort of oversimplify the function of it, is as an accelerator of the venture. So it's a pipeline generator of the ventures, investable ones and scalable ones. When we have also other elements of Timbuktu, which is the set of funds which are off-takers after the pipeline is generated by the hubs, as well as we have units which are looking at impact measurement and management. measurement and management, as well as the policy unit, looking at different matters related to regulation and policy that are supporting the scale up of those ventures, not only within their own countries, but also across the borders. Now, in particular, what has happened in Mining Tech Hub out of Lusaka, we have started its operations less than a year ago, probably 9 months ago. We started that, 10 months ago. So far, in terms of the results, we worked with 10 ventures from 9 different countries, each providing solutions on various matters related to mining tech. So those matters might be health related, and by the way, we have today also a representative of one of those ventures, which are providing safety gear to especially artisanal mining. And we have ventures which provide technology on geospatial data, exploration, drones. We have startups which provide software solution to optimize usage of the equipment, to optimize even help managing the artisanal mining. By the way, we have quite innovative mining tech which is looking at equipment sharing across the borders as well. So there's a set of those ventures that has gone through the acceleration process. We have been provided with some symbolic financing, I should say, but it is equity-free and non-debt, means the grants of about 25K each, which would basically help them to prepare for the next stage of scaling. An interesting element about mining tech hub and mining tech acceleration programs, those are not typical startup accelerators, because mining tech requires much longer perspective in terms of the time and commitment. So we do not talk about the VC firms as the typical off-takers after you work with those companies, but we talk about this area which is called corporate venturing. So the major off-takers are those different mining companies which are there all over the Africa, including both the African ones as well as the international ones, which look at those ventures as the providers of technology and solution, not only technology solution, but also business models that we can take, acquire, and integrate into their value chains. It might be supply chain, it might be production aspects, it might be as well as downstream solutions. I'll stop here.
Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you. Just, we have so little time, so we have to give it a good shape. And so my thinking was, we start with the people. And what are the efforts that touch on people, that touch on incomes, that touch on opportunities? Because ultimately the whole thing hangs on whether that can be delivered. And then we go into some of the financing work Colin has done, some of the work that Omid is doing, and then we end with, okay, what should, for example, the United States or the major, on the geopolitical scale, with Jason telling us a bit more about that and his thoughts on that. It doesn't mean you can't say other things, but that's the shape that I see our brief conversation going through. So, Grace, you were a finalist in one of these mining tech processes. Would you tell us perhaps about your own experience, how eco mining, one, why you sought to connect in that way, and what, how you're leveraging technology to make small-scale mining safe, transparent, and environmentally conscious, and how large is the scale of what eco mining could do? If eco mining succeeded in its goals, wildly, right, as wild as you can imagine it,
Yeah.
what would it do to Africa?
Thank you so much for that question. So just a brief background. We started off as Women in Mining Kenya, which is like a small community-based organization. And what I was doing is I was, at that time, doing internship in DRC, taking my savings and going to the community to talk, to understand what's going on in mining, why are women processing gold barehandedly, why is the scale of what's happening so big and the solutions are not there, why are people not adopting to safer practices? And so with time we realized, one, there was a challenge around convincing people to adopt to the challenge, to the change. And two, there are so many challenges within the African landscape that are unique to Africa, such as issues such as access to energy, technical expertise, and all that. So we started thinking around how can we bring in solutions that, one, are realistic to the context of what African needs, and two, are easily adoptable and can easily fit into what they're already doing, sort of like a transition method into this whole big agenda. And so that's how we started doing research around protective gloves for women who process gold, to be able to customize it specifically for that type of work. And then as time went by, we realized, okay, maybe it's not just an issue of lack of technologies that fit in, but then even if you were to give them technologies that fit in, they would still go back to their old ways of working. So what's the real issue that's underlying in this space? And then we realized that there's actually no incentive for these people to be able to shift to better practices. And so whoever comes in with the best deal gets away with it. And so right now where we are at Eco Mining is we are recognizing that there's the issue around incentive within the space, and also recognizing the issue around data gaps. So there's no specific way to tell this is the scale of what we are doing. Most of the data that exists in the space are inferred data. And so even if you start looking at it and start tracing back the source of the data, you realize that there's so many gaps around accuracy within the space, within artisanal and small-scale gold mining, while the scale of what it is contributing to communities is so huge. Most of the revenues that come from small-scale mining are locally retained. And so when we are looking at what best brings value to communities, and then you see that the economics of artisanal mining makes sense. And so what we are doing right now is we are deploying our solution, but also attaching a tracking data, a tracking system into it to be able to monitor how our miners are adopting this thing, and sort of trying to see if we can be able to integrate that into an incentive system of enabling, using data to be able to enable miners have access to better deals, and then at the same time, this would incentivize them to be able to shift to safer practices. If I was to imagine eco-mining in the biggest way possible, I think we are going to create sort of like an ecosystem, or rather an ecosystem that would enable miners, would incentivize miners, would use data to incentivize miners to have a reason as to why they want to shift into safer practices, as well as bring back value to miners through access to finance, access to investments, and access to all these, and a metric to be able to adhere to all these different standards that exist out there. So, and what our solution does is it centers it around people, tracking people habits. I think that is what we realized that the system was missing. Most of the systems that exist within the space mostly track, like, let's say, the upstream part, and do not give priority to what the actual people are experiencing. And what we are doing is giving back that power to what the people who are the main driving force of the sector, to be able to have a say and as well as benefit from it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Grace. You know, it's so refreshing to hear the phrase "the people" and then minerals together, because so often it's just the minerals, and you lose sight of the people. But Omid, Woodcross has done this amazing work with tin in Uganda. When you hear Grace speaking, and you can speak to your own experience of how you turned new national export regulations into an advantage for local processing and value addition, how companies like yours have helped or can help the formalization of artisanal and small-scale mining in a practical and beneficial way to local communities. What are you hearing, and what does your experience tell us about what we should be doing as African countries?
Sure. Thank you, Martin, and greetings to everyone joining this fantastic event. Can I just make sure you can hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. So in Uganda, President Museveni has been promoting the concept of value addition, pivotal for economic development for a long time now. When it comes to mining, though, he went one step further by banning the export of all unprocessed minerals, meaning that if all mining activity was essentially shut down and all artisanal mining as well as professional mining had to come to a halt unless there was a compelling value addition proposition brought to the table by the private sector. This decision was obviously quite controversial and drew a lot of criticism from the private sector and some of the president's advisors himself. At Woodcross, we saw this dynamic as an opportunity. We realized that if we could build a refinery for any mineral, that we would, first of all, make some amazing social impact by bringing back thousands of miners who'd been impacted by the ban and allow them to go back to work. We'd also create a competitive advantage for our shareholders and set a regional framework for mineral beneficiation in Africa, something that had been tried many, many times, but often met with failure. So against the advice of our friends and family, my partner and I left our corporate jobs and began starting to figure out how we can build a refinery in Uganda. We landed on tin because of the fundamentals of the metal looked very good, and we found some untapped deposits in the southern part of the country that seemed to be feasible for what we wanted to do. We raised the money to build the smelter in January 2023. 7 months later, we were producing LME grade ingots. The government responded very quickly once they saw that the progress we had made, and opened up the export market by passing legislation to allow the export of tin as long as it met international standards. In April 2024, we formally inaugurated our facility. President Museveni personally attended, and since then we've exported 12 containers of refined tin, and we've brought back about 10,000 artisanal miners back to work who'd been impacted by the ban, and we're now actively recruiting tens of thousands of more to come join us in Southwest Uganda to join the tin sector. So that's a little bit about what we've done so far. I'm happy to expand more on the policy and the artisanal mining side as we go through the discussion.
Yeah, thank you so much. So Colin, you're a banker, but you've done other things. I've seen you've been involved in different social enterprises, education. You have an understanding of political transitions and what needs to be done. But how do we pay for this stuff? There's less exploration going on in Africa. Every time I speak to Africans, they keep saying we don't have capital. When you hear this conversation from what Grace is doing, what Timbuktu is trying to do, the example from Woodcross, do these appear to have the opportunity for scaling to you? Or where will that opportunity come from in terms of getting more Africans involved in mining and more value that is created and kept on the continent?
Well, thanks very much to the organizers and welcome to everybody. I must say, I think we're on the precipice of a new age. It is, in a geopolitical sense, We are at the center of the reindustrialization of China and the United States and Europe in particular through these strategic minerals. And Africa is at the center of about 30% of the market for those minerals. So I think that for many reasons, including the population explosion that will emerge out of Africa in the next 75 years, with 4 in 10 people in the world being African by the turn of the century, we are going to be in a position to scale very much the opportunities. I've just come out of, about a month ago, chairing a panel session at what's called the Johannesburg Mining Indaba. And the themes there were very, very strong. And as you know, South Africa, complementing my fellow panelists' expertise, has huge mining expertise, including on the continent. You also obviously have the Canadians like Barrick and others. You have the Chinese, variety of people on the African continent, who are exploiting the African mineral opportunity. But I think the themes are, with regards to exploration, there is capital available, but it's under pressure. That is where capital is most difficult to mobilize. But exploration really is where the regulatory environment is the most sensitive. So if you have the wrong regulatory environment, and many people in South Africa argue that we have not found the sweet spot around regulation, and that inhibits the high-risk exploration investment that takes place. And in fact, in South Africa, there's been a lost decade of exploration. And so that is probably the single most difficult place to mobilize capital. Having said that, there are about 3 funds in South Africa that are explicitly exploration funds. But I believe that with regards to mobilization of capital for African critical minerals, and let me just say, when I say critical minerals, some of the CEOs I spoke to at the Johannesburg Mining Indaba would agree with Grace and basically say all mining in Africa is critical and strategic because the communities totally depend on mining for income and for jobs. And so the Western overlay of what is critical may be different in Africa, by the way. But the fact is that the United States now sees African minerals as highly strategic. The Trump administration and related institutions like the DFC are mobilizing capital. There was an announcement I saw this morning of a fund between the IFC and another entity mobilizing $1 billion fund for African minerals. It's not only African minerals, I should correct myself, it's emerging market minerals, but focused on Latin America and Africa. And I think that is the thin edge of the wedge. I think there's going to be significant amounts of US capital looking to be mobilized into African mining opportunities across funds. And what funds will do is mobilize expertise, management expertise in the management companies of these funds. And what you will see, I'm quite convinced, is highly sophisticated global mining management being mobilized to match with that capital, and you'll see a lot of capital. I don't think that's going to be the problem. I think the problem is going to be, or the challenge, the key challenge is going to be mobilizing those funds into assets which are probably small to medium-sized operating companies, and then scaling those assets into higher performing medium to larger companies that are exporting ore. The second thing I wanted to say is relating to that, one of the biggest issues is that China dominates the processing of ore. So about 90% of all processing, refining of any mineral that comes out of anywhere in the world is through China. So the actual processing, refining capacity of the West is going to have to be significantly transformed and scaled as well. So you can see from what I'm saying, there is a significant, huge opportunity in critical minerals in Africa. I think the capital will be there. I think the expertise is available from global, South African, other African mining expertise. And then it's a question of, can that be sufficiently mobilized and build a track record around processing ore? And the countries, will they provide the regulatory environment and not mess it up? You know, there are so many examples of, take Mozambique, for example. They had the most high quality gas find since Qatar's gas find, with ExxonMobil and a number of other companies effectively committing to invest $50 billion in a country whose GDP is $10 billion. So it's totally transformative. And they managed to effectively create a negative environment and stop the actual development from taking place. My friend from Uganda will know the Chinese invested in a gas field, in a gas discovery many years ago. CNOOC, Goldman Sachs advised when I was there on it. The refining was a major obstacle to the development of the discovery, which is self-defeating. You know, I think we just have to be smarter in the way we regulate and interact. At the same time, Africa must fight its corner for its vested interest, but to stand in the way of development is shooting oneself in the foot. So there's a lot of give and take in the equation. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Colin. I'm curious about that transition. You talked about investing in smaller and medium level companies becoming medium and large level exporting companies. Are the funds being mobilized in the United States? And Jason, I'm coming to you. Are they going to speak to that transition? In other words, does Woodcross and Eco Mining, do they have a path to those funds, or those funds, as they're invested in the process, will these companies in Africa have an opportunity to get a bite of that apple? Colin, do you want to just answer that?
Sure. I mean, I think there'll be some M&A as well. So I think there'll be some people that will come to some of these companies. Maybe they'll need good advice from the Goldman Sachs of the world, because they're going to go and say, you know, if you're a small to medium-sized company, but you're not performing as well or with as much capital, and it can be transformed and then sold, flipped later to bigger companies who can really give it scale, that is going to be part of the process. I would just, leave that thought.
So, Jason, we hear so much from Washington about competing in Africa, competing against the Chinese and others in Africa. Multiple administrations have had Africa strategies. Where are we now? And where should we be going? How can we shape that agenda in a way that is more responsive to the interests of Africans as that have been articulated here?
So I think we are in the energy conversation in this moment of reset, realism, pragmatism, whatever those words mean to people, with a growing recognition, I hope, that climate change is still a critically important topic to address. That's not a view shared by everyone in this administration. But also sort of acknowledging issues of energy security, energy affordability, energy reliability are rising higher on the agenda, coupled with a broad recognition that while clean energy is going to grow very quickly and the demand for critical minerals will be a part, that'll be a driver of that, oil and gas use is not going down anytime soon. People may not like that reality, but that is the current outlook. And so if you're thinking about where those resources and those supplies are going to come from. By the way, the shale revolution may kind of be nearing its peak. U.S. production and oil production is expected to sort of flatline. I mean, obviously, if prices go up significantly, that could change. So these questions of sort of what equity and justice look like in the scope of a still quite slow energy transition, I think are interesting because they come to all parts of energy. If you're thinking about the fact that, as the International Energy Agency, just said, additional supplies of oil and gas are needed in the world today, the question is, where are they supposed to come from? Would it be the lowest cost producers? Would it be the cleanest producers? Or might it be the countries that have not yet developed wealth based on their resources? And that's a difficult conversation to have if you get to a point, which we're not at yet, where, say, oil demand were to start to fall, and you sort of say, like, well, which production is supposed to stop producing first? And are there parts of the world that will understandably say, maybe we get to develop our resources for wealth in the way that Norway, Saudi Arabia, or Alaska has. In addition, at the same time, you're seeing this new era, and that was sort of the point I was getting at in that foreign affairs essay that came out today, where I think the world is presenting a set of changes that are going to give even more pressure, more sense of urgency to thinking about energy security issues. The history of energy is one where energy is used as a coercive tool. It is a source of military and economic and geopolitical strength. The last 20 or 30 years, frankly, have been the exception, where I think we've become relatively complacent about energy security for a variety of reasons, relative calm and stability in energy markets. And that was built on a world where the US brought unprecedented amounts of supply that helped to keep prices reasonably in check, flat electricity demand, at least in the OECD, and a world of relatively copacetic geopolitics and more global economic cooperation and integration. And all of those things are being thrown into reverse today. So a combination of broad factors and shifts in the energy sector, like the rising electrification, which the IEA shows is true in all cases, not just a climate-aligned case, which increases demand for critical minerals, for batteries, and this new world of great power rivalry and competition and economic fragmentation is creating a new sense of urgency for policymakers to strengthen their own energy security. And that is going to lead, I think, many countries to think about reducing exposure to volatile global markets, reducing dependence on global supply chains in which, at least in clean energy, China has a quite dominant position, potentially reducing trade in energy, nearly all of which is fossil fuels today. That can give a greater push to electrification, but it's also going to put even more urgency on this question of how to diversify those global supply chains for critical minerals. And I think that creates a lot of opportunity to develop those resources. But the question is, all countries, and particularly with good justification, I think nations in Africa will say, well, we don't just want to be a source of minerals. We want to have the high value-added downstream activity and the refining and the processing. And we've already seen that play out. We've seen Indonesia put restrictions on the exports of raw nickel because it wants the refining and processing to be done there. Well, you don't just want that, you want the batteries to be manufactured there. But if every country tries to own all of the entire value chain, and countries want to restrict trade in energy because they perceive energy security to be about manufacturing at home, this is massively inflationary for the cost of a clean energy transition at a time when the cost of capital is already very high. And if you ask where the money is going to come from, like advanced economies, which are responsible for most of the CO2 to date and climate change, even wealthy countries are at historic levels of debt not seen since World War II, and Europe is doubling or tripling its defense spending. There is not a sense that governments have the capital to de-risk these investments and to make this all happen. So I think there's a lot of opportunity, but there's also a risk that everyone tries to go about this themselves that actually could be quite difficult, not just for the African outlook, but for the clean energy outlook.
Thank you so much, Jason. So we have 7.5 minutes, and I'd like to come to you on the floor to take 3 questions. And not those questions that are like, this is my first question, then this is also my second question. One single question or a very brief comment. And I'll feel free to interrupt you. And then we shall come for a final round of responses and a passing and an ending thought from our panelists. So please put up your hand. I see a lady there yes, there, you have the microphone.
Hi, my name is Pearl. I'm from Ghana. And as you know, the hot topics in Ghana and most of West Africa in mining is illegal mining, galamsey. And we've seen distractions to natural resources because of this. Is that funding that is following the channel of the blue economy to help within this mining space? You did also talk about regulation.
That was your question. Thank you. Next person. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I had a very brief question, like drawing from cases of like China's mineral for infrastructure cases and deals with DRC. How can African states embed enforceable development benchmarks and transparency clauses for the future mining contracts so that there's more transparency and at the same time the renegotiations after the imbalances are more beneficial for the African countries?
Thank you. At the back there.
Hi, my name is Sneha. I'm a second-year student at SEPA studying climate as well as tech policy. I was wondering if you could comment a little bit about the end uses of the critical minerals. I know we discussed a lot about their use in the energy transition, but I'm wondering if you could talk about the competing priorities also in more of the tech and AI sector, and if you see if that poses any issues.
And we shall have a final question from right here in the center. Just put up your hand. Yes.
Thank you. So to make this quick, I hear a lot about the opportunities that's created, but I wonder, is there enough political will from governments to actually push this through, looking at the political economy of resource governance? And we see in the US with the Lobito Corridor that it completely echoes the colonial extractive mining. And we see that the US just signed a deal with Australia this morning. So what is there to make it different that this time there's going to actually be benefits to populations when the DRC 75% of people still live on $2 a day when mining and mineral have been around for decades?
Thank you. Let me come now to the panel and start with you, Atak. Please feel free to take on any of those questions that you feel that you are comfortable taking on.
Yeah, let me take probably a couple of questions which are interrelated in terms of the technology
and a passing and ending thought.
Yeah, sort of, and trackability of that, right? Sort of, with the current level of technology, one thing that we can definitely address is the trackability of those resources, where this or that mineral comes from, but also where the financial flows goes after those minerals are sold. But one very important aspect that I want to bring in here, also very important from the perspective of sustainable development, blue or green agenda, and the mineral resources. What really matters here is the ultimate holistic impact of using this or that technology vis-a-vis not only the emissions, but also usage of the fossil resources, usage of water and energy. Whereas this striking example that we usually bring in our discussions, 40 years ago, we actually selected a technology for packaging of consumer liquids, which has the lowest carbon footprint. It has the lowest usage of natural resources. It is actually the most lightweight, and that is important also for green transportation perspective. And we scaled up that technology. Do you know what is that? Again, consumer liquid packaging. It's actually plastic bottles, PET bottles. And we now created the scale up of the technology, which becomes actually the second largest pollutant of the earth today. So, and why that happened? Because we just looked at some aspects of the impact of using this or that natural resources, right? So what we are trying to urge is when we look at different technologies, especially vis-a-vis the usage of the natural resources, we need to look at that holistically, not only from the perspective of blue agenda or green agenda or the usage of those resources, but also from the perspective of other types of impact, whether it is pollution, it is socio-economic impact, how it affects the health of the miners, right? How it affects the communities, etc. So this aspect is frequently neglected. And this is what we try to do now when we are talking also with the financial ecosystem, is to make sure that all those innovative financial products that are offered, especially also in the mining sector, are factored with that impact element. So yeah, I'll stop here.
Thank you. Let me come to Jason quickly, because I know you have to run out at exactly 1. We're not going to stay past 1, well, maybe 2 minutes past 1. Jason, what are your closing thoughts?
Just that I think there's a lot of opportunity here, but it's important to sort of recognize where some countries are in this conversation. I think the primary driver for policy, say in the US, is going to be one focused on national security, energy security. You can actually find a little bit of bipartisan cooperation there, making descriptive, not normative comments now. So we're going to need the Development Finance Corporation, Exim Bank, et cetera, to become sort of much more agile, take on more risk. We should remember DFC is, no one's going to the office today. This agency is shut down. That's like, there's a big gap between where we are today and where we need to be. But there are ambitious plans to use this agency as a way to put a lot more capital to work in partnership with the private sector to de-risk investment. I think it's really important, I just want to say, to have conversations like this to always keep front of mind how those sorts of policy actions will affect the countries on the ground, will add value to the people and societies there, but also a recognition that that is probably not the primary driver that's going to fuel the significant increase in government focus on this. And we're going to have to acknowledge that reality while working to make sure that we steer whatever deals they're doing and whatever capital they're putting to work in a way that achieves what we all talked about today, which is how to make sure you're not just accessing or taking resources, but doing it in ways that grow economies.
Thank you. And indeed, that is part of the challenge has always been. I took one of my challenges as a diplomat to how do you take hard interests and sow into them the right things that need to happen in the world. And I think that's part of our challenge and opportunity. And those of you who are students at SIPA, that is precisely what I hope you're learning. How to ride the hard interest, but deliver more than just what the hard interest says you should deliver. Grace, you heard some questions. Which ones speak to you? And let's be as brief as possible, then we can go to the final 2 panelists before heading to lunch.
Yeah, so ideally, there's a question around AI and technology. So it depends on where you are looking at it from. The US, the needs of the West are totally different from the needs of Africans. If you're looking at the United States, there's something around maybe population is decreasing, maybe they're gonna need more robots and AI and all these different types of technologies. If I'm looking at Africa, it's the opposite. The population is increasing. So from the United States, tech is really a big driving factor looking at the future. From African perspective, humans are really like a big driving factor to where the future is headed. And so what I'm looking at within the small-scale mining space and the illegal mining space is it's something that people are looking at their families. They're looking at being able to provide day-to-day sustenance. And it's whoever comes with the best deal that's gonna win. And when we are looking at illegal trade or all these issues we are saying, whether we ban, no matter what we do within the space, it's still going to happen. So the government, all these people might as well just give into it and try and see how do we support this space. Thank you.
Thank you. Artak? Artak, you're... oh, sorry.
I think that's for
I'm
me.
so sorry. Omid, sorry.
No problem.
Sorry.
Yeah, I'm happy to take the question that I think was prefixed with how is it different this time, and the issue of the DRC and people still living on $2 a day, even though the minerals have been there. The reality is the situation on the ground is there's a lot of different complicated factors that lead to the state of mining as it is in, say, the eastern part of DRC, 1,200 kilometers, that arguably is the most prolific mineralized region in the world, probably has more than half of cobalt reserves, probably more than a third of the lithium reserves. And these start at a grassroots level. There's a lot of different stakeholders and groups, different tribes, even within the artisanal miners. And as Grace has alluded to the concept of incentives, this is still a business, and everybody that's involved has commercial incentives in terms of how they're dealing with things. So it's really, really important for the private sector, the stakeholders, to really be able to understand how to manage those incentives and have clear goals that can be achieved while making sure that everyone's incentives are being met or are being aligned. I think the second part is policy and regulatory. I can probably talk, for 3 hours on a lot of policy issues that we've kind of come across that are definitely challenges in trying to develop projects. Defining parameters for value addition. So ministries talk a lot about value addition, but they don't define what value addition is. If you don't give clear thresholds and parameters to the private sector for what value addition means, we cannot complete technical studies and learn how to integrate downstream processing. Tax regimes, they're extremely aggressive and front-end loaded in most African countries. So when you have a capital intensive project that has a 5 or 6 year payback, having to manage all those taxes up front makes it a lot difficult to develop projects. So I think Ministry of Mines needs to work with Ministry of Finance to put in those incentives for project sponsors. The issue of smuggling and illegal mining, it's something that we face here all the time, even though we're supposed to be the only legal exporter of tin in Uganda. There's plenty of other actors that smuggle our minerals out illegally. So you need enforcement at the border, and governance needs to be improved on that front. So these are some of the policy issues that we're working with the Ministry of Mines in Uganda. We are also speaking with governments and ministries in other countries with tin deposits to replicate similar projects, but it needs to be a collaboration between government and the private sector to really dive through a number of competing issues that really create a very opaque picture on how to develop projects.
Thank you very much. Colin?
Thanks very much. I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person, but for those who want to stay in touch, let me just say, join my LinkedIn. We can communicate there. I will be in New York from next week. And good news is for those of Columbia students who will be studying next year, I will be joining again to teach my course, Doing Business in Africa, the Next Frontier of Global Growth, at Columbia Business School, cross-listed with CEPA, so in the fall of next year. So do participate and come join. Let me just say, there's not enough time, but just very briefly, China has a huge head start. Let's be realistic on the continent in mining. I sold a company called Metarex to Jinchuan 14 years ago, with $1.4 billion copper business in the DRC and Zambia. That was 14 years ago. It feels like yesterday, but it tells you a lot about where the Chinese have been. And somebody asked about the infrastructure for mining deals that have taken place, including in the DRC. There's positives and negatives. The negatives are sometimes that the host countries have very little leverage over the developments that are taking place. Actually, it was a World Bank, IMF approved Chinese project in the end, but it was $6 billion infrastructure for mining deal. And the bottom line is, if the Chinese hadn't done it, then that ore would still be in the ground in the DRC and wouldn't be developed, and there wouldn't have been jobs and income. So there's positives and negatives. We have to be realistic. Final thing is, from that Joburg mining Indaba, I would say one of the things to watch that hasn't been mentioned yet is the role of technology, robotics, AI, and so on in mining. And I think it's going to be the role of drones and so on. It's going to be quite interesting to see how that technology can facilitate and fast track exploration and development of mines in Africa. I think you'll see something of a technology revolution in respect of the mining process itself being adopted in the next few years. With that, thanks very much for the session and participation.
Thank you so much to our panelists and to you, the audience. I will not try and sum up the conversation for lack of time and the fact that it was so broad, but I did hear a few points that came across. One is that there are efforts going on the ground to develop companies and solutions to the very real opportunities there in the mining space. Two, when we say that this panel this morning in our workshop is about critical choices, a lot of the critical choices lie in the hands of African governments. That even as we contend with the geopolitics and geopolitical rivalry, a lot of it comes down to African governments and people within African governments making the right choices for their countries and for the regions. Three is that this is a knowledge endeavor, and that there's a lot of knowledge out there. There's a lot of knowledge in Africa, whether it's in South Africa or in Nigeria with oil, etc. How do we leverage what we know even as we expand the development of human resources? And finally, that in terms of geopolitics, the hard interests are going to be hard interests. They're not going to go away. But how do we harness them and draw from them in a way that is responsive to the interests of African people and African states? It's a discussion to be held. This was only the beginning. And from here, we're going to circulate a small working paper to those of you who are in the audience. And we'll continue working on not just convening to have these conversations, as crucial as they are, but getting the information and the knowledge to the political, regulatory engineers and investors who need it so that we can have as much effect on the ground as we can. I'd like again to thank all the staff of IGP and the Africa Center who've worked to make this event happen, to welcome all of you to engage with the Africa Center. We're just on 110th and 5th Avenue, and to wish you all a very great day. Thank you to the panelists. Let's give them a hand of applause.